They said there was nothing to fear. Yet the orbit ellipse around 3, I divided by Atlas, still inhales and exhales with every new measurement. Verdicts arrive fast. Geometry arrives slowly. The object has not changed, our information has. If there is something scary here, it is not a comet with intent, but the room that uncertainty leaves for imagination. Each survey bulletin trims the fit, then reattaches cautions. Short observing arc, awkward phase angles, weather-thinned cadence. Headlines translate caution into closure. Astronomers decline the shortcut. Between reassurance and rigor lies a gap where stories multiply, while evidence is still finding its edges. That gap, not a hidden menace, is what pulls at nerves. A Kaku-style translation helps. Risk lives as a distribution, not a slogan. Most of the mass sits in the center. The tails exist and must be respected. If 3I divided by Atlas is ordinary, patient data will say so. If it is not, that truth will appear the same way incrementally across nights as residuals stop arguing and models stop needing excuses. So we begin in the interval before certainty. We will watch the ellipse tighten, the sign of residuals reverse, the brightening curve obey geometry or refuse to. We will separate what merely looks alarming from what survives a better reduction and a longer arc. The fear was the gap. The work is to close it. Facts and methods data so far. Early arc astrometry and provisional photometry. Assumptions, gravity, only baseline. No non-gravitational term without evidence. Falsifier. Persistent cross-site deviations in position or brightness beyond the stated error budget. In the registry of wanderers, the mark 3I would place this object after Oumuamua and Borisov. It is a working label, not a coronation. Origin is inferred from motion. Unbound trajectory, excess speed beyond the sun's hold, residuals that refuse a bound fit. Until the observing arc grows, even the name sits in pencil. Astronomy writes lightly first, then darkens when repetition permits. Atlas, the asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system, was built for vigilance over grandeur. Small telescopes, wide fields, and rapid cadence trade sheer depth for early notice. The pipeline sorts millions of streaks, deletes ghosts and satellites, and forwards real movers for confirmation. Its gift is time, coordinates quickly handed to bigger glass before geometry turns unkind. Observability is geometry before drama. Phase angle sculpts how dust and ice scatter light. Distance taxes every photon by the inverse square. Low altitude fattens the point spread function and steals precision from centroids. Fast motion trails during exposure, spreading flux, and confusing photometry. Moonlight lifts the background and teaches error bars to swell. Short arcs make generous ellipses. With only a few nights, orbital elements tangle. Adjust time and distance shifts. Adjust distance and velocity pays. Add stations across longitudes and the knot loosens. Parallax helps. Different optics and chips taste different air. Cross-site astrometry turns a nervy curve into a steadier line. Photometry earns trust the same way. Steady cadence matters as much as depth. Color indices anchor calibration. If GR and R-I agree on direction, physics is likely speaking. If they quarrel, the instrument is. Trailed. PSF modeling replaces wishful apertures on fast frames. Sky backgrounds are measured, not guessed, and 0 points stop wandering. Context guards against fantasy. Oumuamua's light curve whispered shape and spin. Borisov carried the ordinary speech of a comet's coma. If 3I divided by Atlas rhymes with that lineage, it will do so cumulatively consistency across filters. a brightening law that behaves when phase is respected, residuals that relax as the arc matures. If it refuses to rhyme, that too will show up by persistence, not by headline. The gap between a press sentence and an orbit fit is intentional. One entertains hypotheses, the other retires them. Survey notes lean cautious because the cosmos rewards patience. Fear grows when geometry is thin and language is thick. The remedy is more geometry, not louder adjectives. Facts and methods data so far. Multi-night, multi-site astrometry with provisional orbit solutions, early photometry affected by phase and trailing assumptions, standard calibrations, gravity, only baseline until residuals demand more. Falsifiers, cross-site residuals that remain non-Gaussian after re-reductions. Phase, normalized light curves that disagree across instruments, parallax-informed fits that fail to converge under independent pipelines. The trigger was ordinary in size and awkward in implication. A small cluster of early measurements that refused to sit neatly together. Brightness climbed faster than a simple law would like. A thin trail would not average away, and the orbit fit shifted just enough to unsettle anyone who has watched short arcs play tricks. It wasn't spectacle. It was friction numbers rubbing against assumptions. Outside the dome, that friction was recast as certainty. Headlines stitched a verdict from thin cloth. Odd light, odd path, odd risk. Inside the workflow, the impulse was procedural. Extend the arc, cross-check longitudes, rebuild the 0 points. Ask whether moon, weather, cadence, or a hurried reduction had painted the ordinary to look strange. Suspense blooms in gaps, astronomy closes them. The light drew first scrutiny. Cometary activity turns a point into a faint cloud, making small look large and steady look restless. Rotation modulates flux. A narrow jet biases photometry. Shallow phase angles inflate dust like stage lighting. Each can impersonate an anomaly until geometry behaves and cadence steadies. Motion drew second scrutiny. Bound orbits should harden as nights accrue. Truly hyperbolic paths should not beg for capture by rounding error. Early solutions can pretend to be either, depending on which frames beat the clouds and which centroids paid a tax to speed. Milliseconds matter when data are few and correlations are strong. Between those questions sat a quiet temptation. Fit a non-gravitational term early. Sublimation can push, outgassing can torque, thermal effects can bias motion in ways that look like intent to the untrained and like residual systematics to the cautious. The issue was never, can it be fitted, but has it earned its place yet? So the project sets 3 clear objectives. First, separate appearance from physics by rebuilding the light curve with steadier cadence, darker backgrounds, trailed PSF handling, and color sequences that agree across filters. Second, loosen the covariance knot by broadening the baseline. Multi-site astrometry, verified timestamps, and harmonized reductions that survive independent pipelines. Third, test non-gravitational hypotheses last, not first, and only after the gravity-only model stops improving under honest housekeeping. To keep perception from outrunning reality, each suspected anomaly is quarantined and scored. Does the brightening survive phase normalization and cross-filter consistency? Do residuals stay structured after a bad night is demoted or a station is reweighted? Does the period hint persist when cadence turns regular and the moon gets out of the way? Only the survivors graduate from curiosity to claim. This approach refuses drama yet welcomes surprise. If 3I divided by Atlas proves conventional, the verdict will arrive conventionally residuals that relax, a light curve that obeys geometry, and an orbit class that stops caring which solver is asked. If it resists convention, the proof will accumulate the same way through stability, under subtraction tests and improvements that alternatives cannot mimic. In short, the film will not hunt a monster. It will trace how monsters appear when distributions are young and data are thin. The path forward is simple to say and slow to do. More sky, better cadence, cleaner reductions, and a willingness to let ordinary explanations win when they are strong enough. Facts and methods data so far: early arc astrometry, provisional photometry with heterogeneous cadence, initial gravity only fits, assumptions, stable nightly calibration, trailed PSF treatment on fast frames, no A term without necessity. Falsifiers, cross-site residual structure that survives re-reductions. Phase, normalized light curves consistent across filters, yet still anomalous. Statistically robust, non-gravitational acceleration that improves fit quality beyond alternative weight models and passes subtraction stability tests. The sequence starts with geometry because geometry sets the price of every claim. The team lengthens the arc by nights, not by headlines. Each new coordinate trims the orbital ellipse. The residuals wander, flip sign, then quiet down. What once looked nervy begins to answer in smaller numbers and narrower bars. Astrometry is weighed, not counted. One clean centroid at altitude outranks 3 hurried frames in bad seeing. Stations publish uncertainties, reductions respect them. Short arcs couple parameters like mirrors, facing mirrors, time, distance, velocity, all trading illusions. Add a single, well-placed night and the reflections stop colluding. Reduction is rebuilt from the floor up. Bias and flats. Distortion maps. Absolute timing audits down to milliseconds. Fast motion gets a trailed PSF, not a wishful stellar aperture. Trailing losses that once hid inside noise are modeled and billed. The centroid shifts a fraction. The fit listens and reshapes. Cadence becomes a metronome. Shallow but regular exposures beat deep, erratic ones. A light curve stabilizes when the clock does. Bursty schedules, manufacture peaks, even pacing dissolves them. The dome breathes at fixed intervals so the curve can stop hyperventilating. Phase angle writes optical illusions. Forward scattering can turn modest dust into theater. Brightness is normalized to phase, then stress tested across filters. If GR and RI agree after calibration, physics is speaking. If they quarrel, the instrument is gossiping. Color resolves whether we are watching activity or lighting. Rotation speaks in low amplitude. A tumbling body paints periodic shade across its surface. Periodogram tools search for rhythm but refuse to baptize a period from a few flattering crests. If the supposed signal fades as geometry improves, rotation was only a trick of angle and schedule. Coma, when present, is a courteous liar. It makes small look large and steady look restless. The pipeline uses concentric apertures to separate nucleus from fog. A coma that tracks phase like a textbook is evidence. A coma that appears only in mushy seeing is weather in costume. Orbit fitting has a grammar of honesty. A bound solution should firm as the baseline fattens. A truly hyperbolic path should not beg for capture when rounding errors are removed. Multiple solvers, weight models, and outlier policies are tried. The winner is not the prettiest curve, but the solution that survives alternatives. Monte Carlo teaches humility. Initial conditions are drawn inside reported covariances and flung forward under gravity. Fans of possible futures fill a heat map. Confidence lives where many trials agree. Fear prefers the fat tail. The tail is logged, not lionized. Outliers are interrogated for reduction sins before they are granted physics. Non-gravitational terms stay locked unless gravity fails, honestly. Sublimation can push, jets can torque, thermal recoil can masquerade as intent. But a convenient A term is not an apology for messy housekeeping. Only when residuals stop improving under longer arcs, cleaner clocks, and stricter weighting does the cabinet open. Comparative context keeps fantasy in check. ʻOumuamua whispered shape and spin in a thin, stubborn, light curve. Borisov spoke fluent coma, behaving like a classic comet in exile. Normalized overlays offer perspective, not prophecy. If 3I divided by Atlas rhymes, the rhyme must survive phase corrections and independent pipelines. Cross-site consistency is the immune system. North and south, desert and island, different chips and optics. If the signal keeps its shape across air and hardware, it earns the right to be called real. If it dissolves at a new longitude, it was an artifact rehearsing for credibility. Now, the anomaly stack is assembled without adjectives. Item 1, brightening steeper than a simple law. Item 2, residuals that choose a side too long. Item 3, a reported tail that photographs more readily than it reproduces. Each goes into quarantine, facing geometry and method, not metaphors. Fear hears steep brightening and imagines jets. Curiosity hears the same and imagines phase. Fear reads residuals as intent. Curiosity reads calibration debt. Fear sees a tail and sees a flag. Curiosity sees, seeing. The stack is not a tower toward a conclusion. It is a tray of specimens labeled for retest. Time is pushed forward by labor, not rhetoric. Nights are scheduled, canceled by clouds, rescheduled. The ellipse tightens because photons were collected, not because a quote was clever. Residuals stop picking sides when covariance loses leverage. The fit quiets because the baseline grew teeth. Photometry improves after housekeeping. Standard stars are respected. 0 points stop wandering. Backgrounds are measured instead of guessed. If there is a tail, it becomes modest. If there is rotation, its ambition shrinks. The curve tells fewer stories, and one coherent one. Stability under subtraction guards the door. Remove a night, does the solution collapse? Remove a station, does the period evaporate? A model that survives small insults earns trust. Elegance in a full data set means little if a single missing brick brings the arch down. Information theory tallies progress. Each additional hour buys a smaller bite of entropy. Diminishing returns are not a failure, they are the receipt that certainty is expensive. Cadence is tuned to maximize information per hour, not spectacle per frame. The public never sees this dial, but they feel its discipline. Communication is milestone gated. A note goes out when orbit class stabilizes across independent solvers. Another when phase normalized photometry is reproduced at multiple longitudes. A third if a non-gravitational term becomes statistically stubborn and outperforms alternative systematics. Silence fills the spaces where those bars aren't cleared yet. As the weeks pass, the stack thins. Brightening that seemed aggressive relaxes once phase is obeyed. Residual bias fades after a bad night is demoted. The tail, if real, is shy and consistent. What remains is interesting without melodrama. A small asymmetry that deserves more sky, not more superlatives. Surprise is still on the table, haste is not. If an A term proves durable across weight models and pipelines, it will be adopted with paperwork, not romance. If rotation reveals a period that holds across filters, it will be named and dated. If neither holds, ordinary becomes a conclusion earned, not an insult tossed. The sequence ends where it began, geometry. The object reaches kinder phase, the moon wanders off, air steadies, and the observing arc crosses a threshold buried in a method's appendix but sacred at 2 a.m. The model ellipse stops breathing so loudly, what's left is a map of likelihoods the public can live with, wide enough to respect, narrow enough to plan around. A window for continued follow-up is posted. A checklist of tests is taped to the console, and a quiet promise is kept. The next sentence will be written by data, not by appetite. Facts and methods data so far: multi-night, multi-site astrometry with trailed PSF handling. Phase, normalized, cross-filter photometry with stabilized 0 points. Monte Carlo orbit ensembles under reported covariances. Robustness checks across solvers and weight models. Assumptions: gravity, only baseline until residuals demand otherwise. Cadence optimized for information gain. Outlier policy, conservative and explicit. Falsifiers: non-Gaussian cross-site residuals that persist after re-reductions. Phase-corrected light curves that disagree across instruments. Statistically persistent non-gravitational acceleration that outperforms systematic alternatives and passes subtraction stability. Solution fragility under removal of single stations or nights. Silence is not a void. It is a protocol. Observatory teams do not traffic in cliffhangers. When the observing arc is young, the most precise statement is the least dramatic. More data are required. To the public, this sounds like evasion. Inside the workflow, it is a flag uncertainty above threshold, communication deferred until the numbers agree with themselves. Photons travel faster than prose. Measurements flow into reduction queues within hours. Statements wait for cross-solver convergence and cross-site sanity checks. Draft updates circulate with questions penciled in the margins. Did parallax truly help? Did the phase correction carry across filters? Do any station residuals look non-Gaussian? One unresolved "not yet" is enough to hold the paragraph. There is a risk unique to speech. A single night with swollen sky background, a millisecond timestamp slip, an unmodeled trailing loss, each can echo through a young orbit fit-like rumor. The cost of an early flourish is not only a correction later, it is public trust sanded thin. Silence protects something fragile. The credibility of the next sentence. Press timing and telescope timing obey different clocks. Headlines expand to fill uncertainty. Domes compress it with cadence. The vacuum between provisional and robust is where speculation blooms. Teams shrink that vacuum not with adjectives, but with geometry. 2 more clear nights, another longitude, colder detectors, kinder phase angles. The best answer to hype is a better baseline. Caution is cultural as well as technical. Oumuamua taught a discipline of separating artifact from anomaly. Borisov reminded everyone that surprise can still be ordinary. The lesson is not fear of being wrong, but respect for how long rightness takes to accumulate. Silence is not hesitation, it is incubation. Even internally, quiet has lanes. Green means independent pipelines, see the same thing. Amber means one station disagrees, investigate. Red means rewind the reduction. Those colors seldom leave the room, yet they govern what does. Each hue is data, wearing the uniform of discretion. When updates finally speak, their verbs are modest, suggests, supports, consistent with. These are not hedges. They are units of measure acknowledging a distribution. Each sentence ends with what would change it. Silence bought the time to compute that humility. Facts and methods data so far. Cross-site orbit fits clearing, internal convergence, phase-corrected photometry reproduced across instruments. Assumptions. Communications lag at least one validation cycle. Residuals must be Gaussian under robust weighting before release. Falsifiers. A re-reduction that reopens the orbit class. Cross-site posteriors that diverge. Stability tests that fail under subtraction, or independent teams reporting incompatible solutions. The most honest answer available is a distribution, not a declaration. The orbit that now survives across independent solvers is gravity only and conservative. With the lengthened arc, previously skittish parameters have narrowed, the hyperbolic excess is bounded, covariance has lost leverage, and the fit no longer pleads for a non-gravitational crutch. Residuals sit inside their budgets without demanding jets or thermal recoil. What remains is the ordinary strangeness of a small body viewed under unkind geometry. Photometry has stopped arguing with itself. Phase normalized light curves, rebuilt on steadier cadence and darker backgrounds, no longer sprint ahead of simple brightening laws. Color indices hold shape after calibration is tamed. G, R, and Ri tell the same story on different nights and different chips. A coma, if present, behaves modestly. A tail, if present, is shy. Hints of rotation either shrink under regular cadence or resolve into a low amplitude rhythm that fits the object's scale. That is the provisional resolution. 3I divided by Atlas is interesting without being theatrical. It sits where a cautious astronomer expects it to sit once time and geometry are allowed to work. The corridor of futures has narrowed to a region governed by mechanics, not headlines. Interstellar remains a label justified by motion. Threat has not earned a line in the logbook. Provisional does not mean flimsy. It means priced. The corridor exists because nights were spent gathering photons and days were spent refusing convenient narratives. The uncertainty that survives is not a plot hole. It is the cost of finite cadence, imperfect weather, and distance taxing every photon twice. It will shrink further, but never to zero, because nature seldom pays for absolute closure on demand. The first cost is telescope time. Information gain per hour flattens as the baseline fattens, yet follow-up must continue to keep the corridor honest. That means allocating nights that could have chased supernovae, timed exoplanet transits, or deepened survey fields. Small, fast surveys can revisit often, larger glass rations access. Each booked slot is a polite debt to every other question the sky might answer. The second cost is reduction discipline. End-to-end reprocessing, trail PSF handling, timing audits, cross-site zero-point harmonization consumes people more than machines. Senior eyes interrogate junior pipelines not out of ritual suspicion, but because subtle systematics age badly once published. This labor is invisible to audiences and indispensable to truth. The third cost is compute. N-body propagators and Monte Carlo ensembles are cheap by the minute and expensive by the million. When priors widen, trial counts balloon. When outliers are quarantined, alternative weight models must be explored. The bill is not only for CPU cycles, it is for methodological patience rerunning with different assumptions until stability is earned rather than asserted. There is also a cost in communication. Speak early and you buy clarity later with interest. Speak late and you lose credibility to louder voices. Teams address this with stage notes. A calm message when orbit class stabilizes. Another when phase normalized photometry is independently reproduced. A third only if a non-gravitational term becomes statistically stubborn and outperforms systematic alternatives. Each update ships with its own expiry conditions test that would change the next sentence. Opportunity cost cuts inside the collaboration as well. Analysts who could be reducing survey artifacts or tuning machine learning filters spend cycles on one object because the world is watching. That is not waste, it is triage. Public attention can be a magnifier or a funhouse mirror. The discipline is to turn scrutiny into methods that will outlive the headline. Policy drifts at the edge of the frame. What if scenarios, deflection drills, to the practical and fantasies to the excitable are acknowledged, then filed. They are not the subject here because the data do not require them. The currency is likelihood, not theater. If future evidence ever asks for more, the paperwork exists. For now, mechanics suffice. Against this ledger of cost stands a quiet asset, accumulated confidence. The orbit is robust under subtraction tests. The light curve is consistent across instruments and phase angles after calibration. Cross-site astrometry has shed its non-Gaussian nerves. The update is modest because the evidence is modest. The scariest thing, it turns out, was the geometry gap, not a twist hiding in the tail. So the story pauses rather than ends. The corridor is narrow enough to navigate without romance and wide enough to respect. A final answer remains, a moving target because the sky is alive. Today's answer is serviceable, purchased with hours on domes, days in pipelines, and the refusal to sell certainty at a discount. Facts and methods data so far. Gravity, only orbit solutions convergent across solvers. Multi-site astrometry with trailed PSF modeling. Phase-aware, cross-filter photometry with stabilized 0 points. Monte Carlo posteriors with narrowed spread. Assumptions. Residuals explained by geometry and calibration. No persistent non-gravitational term required. Falsifiers. Structured cross-site residuals after reruns. Phase-corrected light curves that diverge across instruments. Statistically durable non-gravitational acceleration that beats systematic alternatives and passes subtraction stability. New radar divided by IR constraints that reopen the class. The next usable window is defined by angles, not appetite. As 3I divided by Atlas moves into kinder phase geometry, forward scattering eases and elongation grows, buying darker frames and steadier centroids. Background noise falls, trailing is tamed by shorter exposures, and the photometry that once jittered begins to walk a straight line. Geometry, not bravado, makes precision possible. Follow-up favors rhythm over spectacle. A chain of short, regular exposures across longitudes stitches a light curve that ignores clouds and the moon's mood. Sequence filters lock color so calibration can't drift between instruments. The goal is translation. The same story told on different chips, under different air, ending in the same numbers. Consistency is the measure of truth. Astrometry resumes its quiet work. Each night fattens the baseline, parallax deepens, covariance loses, the leverage it used to bully fits. Subtraction tests drop a station, drop a night, should leave the solution mostly indifferent. Monte Carlo fans tighten. The fat tail that fed imaginations becomes distant and thin, a curiosity rather than a headline. A checklist rides the console. Watch amplitude for rotation that survives, phase corrections and cadence smoothing. Watch color indices for slides that would betray fresh dust or a modest coma. Watch residuals for a structure that refuses to die and therefore earns a small, honest, non-gravitational term. None of these are promises. All are chores that keep rigor awake. If a surprise arrives, it will be admitted with paperwork. A period that holds across filters will be named and dated. A tail that survives better sky and stricter reductions will be described without trumpets. A non-gravitational fit that beats systematic alternatives will graduate from suspicion to parameter. Endurance, not enthusiasm, decides adoption. The closing thought belongs to distributions. What felt scarier than NASA would say was never a hidden menace. It was the size of the unknown when the ark was young. Uncertainty is not a villain. It is the stage on which truth rehearses. The remedy was cadence and time. The cost was patience sold in night hours and quiet updates. So the frame widens. The corridor of likely futures is narrow enough to plan around and wide enough to respect. The object keeps moving. Indifferent to our adjectives, the teams keep measuring. Indifferent to applause and faithful to residuals. The fear was the gap. The gap is smaller now, and shrinking is the plan. Facts and methods. Next steps. Multi-longitude cadence with phase, aware cross-filter photometry. Gravity only fits under robust weighting. Deferred non-gravitational testing until residuals demand. Assumptions, nightly calibration stability, information gain prioritized over depth. Falsifiers, diverging cross-site posteriors. Phase, normalized light curves that refuse to match. Statistically persistent accelerations that outperform systematic models. New constraints that reopen the orbit class.